Welcome to the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. I'm thrilled you're here. My name is Jason Elkins, and in addition to being your host, I'm also a former U.S. Army paratrooper, third-generation commercial hot air balloon pilot, paramotor pilot, ex-Montana fly fishing guide, advanced open water scuba diver, and a full-time nomad that's visited more than 30 countries on 6 continents. As a seasoned adventure travel expert with a passion for creating and sharing meaningful experiences, I'm on a quest to impact the lives of adventure travelers, the tour operators they rely on, and the communities that host them. Every week, I bring you exclusive interviews with fascinating adventure tourism experts who have agreed to share their personal stories, favorite destinations, and some invaluable travel insights they've picked up along the way. We'll enjoy a casual conversation, create some connections, and likely share some laughs. It's my hope that by the end of each episode, this big world will feel just a bit smaller. Let's get started, shall we? Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Big World Made Small Adventure Travel Podcast. Today, we've got Steve Wilson. Steve is the founder of LiNGER Travel. I had a conversation with him a couple of weeks ago, and what he's doing is a little bit different than most of the guests we've had on the show. But I definitely think it fits within the realm of adventure travel. As you define it as getting out there, doing new things, having new experiences, and Steve's excited about that. So, Steve, happy to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thanks, Jason. Very good to be on the show.
Steve, we're gonna dig a little bit into kind of who you are as a person, your background, what got you from where you are from where you were to where you are now. And I kind of hinted that LiNGER's a little bit different, so we ought to touch on that before we go too much further. So, what do you think kind of separates you from maybe some of the other guests we've had on the show as far as your business?
Well, LiNGER in its simplest format is a sabbatical planning specialist, and we look to create trips that are complex. So it's creative trip planning, it's complex trip planning. The longer and more out there, the brief is the sort of thing we thrive on. That's I've made it difficult for myself. We've made it difficult for ourselves as a company, but it makes it interesting. It makes it exciting, and if ever there was a niche, I would say this is definitely a niche.
I believe so. And I think the last time we spoke, I wasn't completely clear on the word sabbatical. I grew up, my mother was in academia, and so the term sabbatical was thrown out there, and so my definition floating around in my head was that you had to pitch a big project to the university you worked at to go on some exotic year away type of thing. But the way you described it was a little different. So how do you define sabbatical for our listeners?
It is. I mean, essentially, it's having a longer than normal period of time to travel. And it doesn't mean being on the road all the time. It doesn't mean it has to be some epic adventure. It doesn't mean equally that you're sitting there writing a book or studying for a project or something in the traditional academic term. In fact, in our world with it, it's far more relevant to entrepreneurs, to certain industries and more in recent times where that balance of having a time away from work, mid-career, towards the end of the career, early on in some occasions, depending on the scenario, affords that luxury of time to get away from the usual routine. And
is there a length of time, Steve, that you kind of like when you and your colleagues sit around, you're like, okay, a sabbatical, or maybe the better way to put this is the clients we work with are typically going to travel for X amount of time minimum, or is it?
No, there's no hard and fast rule. I mean, in our eyes, if we can add value to it in terms of the creativity and what they want out of it, then that's a good fit. And if we can't, then there's plenty of other companies that would be better suited. Sabbatical in terms of duration, I mean, if someone's only ever taken a week off or 3 days or 4 days in their career and they're building whatever they've done, a month can be 7 times whatever they've done in the last 10 years. It can feel like an eternity to be away from, and a real luxury for them. So there's no hard and fast rule. We've planned on the shorter length, if it comes under the sabbatical notion, it would probably be about a month and upwards. But equally, at the other end, at the 12-month range is probably the limit. And, tailor making or being heavily involved with someone's life on the road for 12 months, where you've got a bespoke year ahead of you, in a sense, that's a long period of time. It's a long time for us to be in contact with them. Usually, or historically, I say, and I use the term historically as it's sort of pre and post COVID,
Yep.
Because before people would plan differently and more in advance. And going back 5-6 years, even technology was in a different different stage. And now, post-COVID, there is more of that decision to be on the road and plan as you go. And so it's a different sort of level and type of involvement that we're finding. But certainly, traditionally, if someone was planning, say, 6 months or up to a year away, they would get in touch at least a year in advance. So you're in regular contact with those individuals. They're then traveling for a whole year. So you've had 2 years of getting to know these. That's a long time.
Wow. Yeah. I think any trip planner, especially, kind of in the adventure travel space or in the, just something that's a little bit more hands-on, any planner in this business kind of creates a little bit of a connection with their clients. Probably really enjoys that. But really, it's usually 1 week. Or,
absolutely.
2 weeks away. And the planner kind of sets everything up. There's a little bit of back and forth at the beginning. Once they get it all set up and then they have their processes in place and the guest goes and maybe they chat about it after they get back. But I can't even imagine working with somebody for so long.
Absolutely. And every individual is different. Some are more adventurous than others. Others want more hand-holding. Others have traveled. Some have traveled a lot. And so they're very comfortable on the road, but they didn't want to do it as they had done before. They've got a higher budget because these things clearly are expensive. It's that jump from backpacking to true flash packing, if you like, for want of a better term, and traveling for that extended time. So, technology as well has helped us. I mean, it's good and bad. WhatsApp is the key app for communication, and the ease with which you can fix problems is brilliant with that. And equally, just to engage with someone or connect when you need to. But the downside is you cannot escape. So you're easily accessible, but that helps we work with. So typically speaking, no major emergencies. And
it's interesting also because I can imagine that selecting the right person to plan a trip like this is super important. If you take 1 or 2 short vacations a year and go do something, they're important to you. I'm not going to say they're not important, but if there's if you choose the wrong operator, maybe there's a lot of bumps along the way. It's a week, it's a week and a half. It's like, okay, well, we're probably going to use someone else next time. But if you're taking a year off from work to go really do this, I mean, that's like super important. You don't want to get 1 month into it and realize that everything you've booked for the next 11 months was booked by somebody that was maybe not paying real close attention. It's hard to kind of change gears. So I can imagine that people are pretty careful about selecting, to work with you.
I mean, a big part of it is that mentality of having that, excessive attention to detail and being that we're detail planners. We get it, and it rolls into your own lives and it can drive your own family nuts in terms of how you envisage things, how you operate. But we have a small team, but we've traveled a lot. Most of the 60, 70 countries that we feature, we've got good first-hand knowledge. And I don't mean a long weekend or a transit point. It's really taking time to go deep off the beaten path. And that's a big part of what we encourage. But equally, it's understanding that attention to detail. And we've tried and tested it. I've done 3 very long extended trips, and I'm always thinking of the next one. So we go far beyond the obvious, far beyond. I use the term Machu Picchu's of the world, which is a major highlight in Peru, and I love it there. But Peru is an example. There's so much more to that enormous country than just that circuit, and it's great to be able to bring those other areas of a country like that into an extended trip when someone has that time.
So you mentioned kind of attention to detail, your own personal. You touched on some of your own personal travel and some of the experiences that your team has. So this is a great opportunity for us to just jump back. We're going to hit rewind. We're going to go all the way back as far as you want to go. And usually people in this business have some kind of defining moment or something that happened early on that caused them to want to do this. I'm curious what your story is. How far back do you want to go?
I didn't come from a family of people who were into traveling / holidays, vacations, whatever you want to call it. It was definitely, I was the strange one in the family. I could never get over going home. Until to this day, I hate going home from a trip. I find that I really have the blues. And that comes from young childhood, but I didn't ever have that exposure to the world. So it wasn't growing up in a diplomat's family and a military family where you move around, certain industries. But it was lurking, and actually it was watching Michael Palin during his travel shows, and his first one around the world in 80 days, and then the pole to pole. And I probably saw that early mid-teens and thought, well, that looks fun. And you just sort of park it in the brain, something that's you've enjoyed watching, and it really, it just sort of set a thought for adventure. But you grow up. I mean, nobody thinks, certainly at the time of working in experiential travel, this world. I mean, we grew up thinking there's about 3 jobs in the world: banking, law, or accountancy. So having gone into one of those industries for a few years, it wasn't great. I thought I had a thirst for adventure. I'd lived in Mexico for a year and I'd learned languages. So, it all sort of fell into place of getting a taste of Mexico in the late 90s when, especially as a Brit, it was pretty exotic. It wasn't a destination that you went to. And I went over there and I traveled it with the Lonely Planet and read this thing more closely than any book I'd ever studied in my life.
I'm going to stop you, Steve. What was you mentioned that you went one of those more traditional paths for a while, and for the listeners that aren't able to see your face, I saw kind of the look on your face, and I wanted to disparage any particular line of work because we all have our own thing. But what were you doing before you went to Mexico or
I was
finance?
In the investment bank for a few years, and it wasn't a good time. I mean, anyway, to be in it, so it was tough at that particular time for that industry. But and I thought, well, I'll take a time out, and I went away with a return ticket, knowing I was going to ignore that return. I went through every country in Latin America overland or by water, where you couldn't really go through the Darien Gap to get from Panama to Colombia, and at the end of it, thought, well, that's a lot of countries, and it was a year and a half on the road. Let's see if that knowledge could be useful. And then that's where it sort of began, working with specialist travel operators over here. At the time, it's 20 years ago now, there were just a handful of, say, Latin America specialists. So I was with one of those, and that was the starting point. And I moved around, and yeah.
What did your family, friends, other people in your world, maybe even your employer in the finance world, what did they all think when you picked up and took off?
They couldn't really relate, but they knew I was fairly mad. At the age of 20 or whatever, they said, "Oh, where are you going this year for your holiday?" And I'd bought a ticket to Venezuela. It was, it doesn't have the best reputation now, and back then it didn't really either. So that's where I was going for my first exploration solo, and that was just a 2-3 week holiday to get away. But they couldn't relate. But it was something I had to do. And
did you? When you were younger, before you did that, I'm reflecting kind of on some of my own experiences. I'm curious if you kind of relate as well. As before I really started traveling, or when I've been in places in my life where I couldn't travel as much, I had a hard time connecting with people. I just kind of always felt like I didn't really understand them. They were so into having the house and the car and the dog and the cat. And then, I've been traveling full time now for about 2.5 years. And I notice when I travel, I start to run into other people that are traveling, and it's like, oh my gosh, these people get it. Like, where were you when I was growing up, or whatever, did you have that experience as well?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And you make some of your best friends on the road, people you can connect with, and then you run into them again, and it becomes a smaller world. I love that element. I love the freedom of it, the unscripted freedom to be able to get away and explore at your pace, and that's what I had done for that year and a half, and only returned home once I'd completed that full circle, and really covered it, fulfilled that dream of seeing every country in Latin America. That's which had its highs and lows, and I always say this with the sabbaticals that we plan. You don't go away on a long trip and expect every day to one massive high. That's just not human nature. You'll have your challenges. You'll have your personal admin. You need to build in time to get other things done that are going on back at home, because you're not probably 18. It's not quite that same backpacker, 18, 25, backpacker mentality. But you try and prepare people psychologically for the travel, life on the road, which. Let's discuss some of those, because I've experienced them just in the last couple of years. I know you have in your travels as well. And if somebody's getting ready, like, okay, I'm going to go for a year, whether they're booking with you or not, maybe you just have a friend that's like, man, I just sold all my stuff. I'm just going to go travel for a year.
What are the like surprise things that you think you'd mention? Like, hey, don't be surprised when this happens. What kind of advice would you give?
Well, I think it all depends how you're going. If you're going on your own, ultimately you've got in some respects is the easiest because you haven't got to compromise any decisions all about what you want to do, where you want to go. You can make all the decisions with that. And we do a number of trips for solo travelers. The downside of that, you can drive yourself a bit crazy traveling too long. And when, as you said, when you don't run into those other people, the like-minded or the conversation, that can get a bit lonely. And there's only so many meals you feel like undertaking in a restaurant and table for one.
Right. And even if you do meet those people that are like-minded, they kind of have their own path. They've got their plan. So maybe you stay, if you're the type that stays at a hostel or something or some sort of guest house, you meet them, but then 3 days later they're leaving to go a different direction. So I feel like when I meet them, I feel, okay, there's other people in the world like that. And then they leave. And I really enjoy connecting with the local communities, but they all kind of think you're crazy too, to be honest. I mean, it's like, I'm in Colombia right now and I love the Colombian people, the culture. And pretty much every time I meet somebody, they're like, you're here by yourself? You don't have any family here? You don't have a home back in, like they ask, where do you live in the U.S.? I don't live in the U.S. I live here. Oh, where do I live in an Airbnb here and I don't have a family and nobody's traveling with me. And they just kind of frankly look at me like I'm crazy. And,
and that's often, it's so far removed to those cultures to, embark on these long trips anyway. I mean, it's very much a part of, say, more our world, these sort of things. And, and if you think of the younger generations who are doing the backpacking, it's typically, there'll be certain parts of the world and countries where that just isn't an option for different reasons. But, one of the things, if you're traveling solo, I will encourage that you will do some sort of activity, be it a hike, a multi-day thing like that, or some sort of mini journey within that where you're going to be with other people. So you join up, sign them up on a small group basis and you've got that camaraderie. And yes, at the end of it, you're probably going in separate directions again. And quite honestly, a lot of the people, they don't want that commitment of sort of traveling. That's why they're going solo. But I think that helps to strike a balance.
I think you're right. I found myself mixing something. I found myself specifically in Southeast Asia for some reason. I was just like, okay, I'm going to go book. I booked a day to the elephant sanctuary in Thailand, and the elephants were fun, and it was also kind of nice to be around some other travelers just for a day because I'm working as well as I travel. So I do tend to spend a lot of time in my co-working space or in my Airbnb in front of my computer and having that connection. I agree. I think that's something that catches a lot of people by surprise is the potential loneliness of it and people back home not understanding. Sometimes there's a lot of pressure to, hey, Dad, are you going to be back are you going to be back for my birthday? And like, I've got a teenage son who travels with me in the summers. His birthday is in early September. He's with me all summer, yet wants me to be back in Arizona for his birthday in early September. And it presents its own challenges. And then, of course, there's, finding the laundromat because I've learned that places here in Colombia don't have dryers and it's very humid. So doing laundry can be a pain.
And I think it's one of those things that comes up almost on every conversation about a sabbatical or a longer trip is no matter what your financial background is, your wealth, people don't like paying hotel laundry prices. It's understandable as well when you see them in places and understanding how that all works. It's, they're the sort of tidbits of information we help them with because we're used to it.
Yeah.
Communications, eSIMs these days are helping, depending on your phone, and as opposed to changing SIMs in every country. Obviously, Wi-Fi is in most places, but it's that how to stay in touch. That sort of life admin is definitely part of the planning.
Right. So I'm curious, the people in your life, because you live in the UK.
Yes.
So the people in your life that are close to you there, are they all fully on board or do you have your own challenges with family, friends? When you go travel, do they get you now or have you surrounded yourself? What does that look like for you?
No, I have a family that's understanding. And the upside, I've got a 5 and just turned 8-year-old. I started taking the older one away when he was He just turned 6, and it felt the right time. And we actually, as a family, we divide up a little bit with the kids sometimes, and 6 felt the right age to start with the older one. And we get this quality time. I take him away for a couple of weeks. We've been to Costa Rica, Panama, Ireland, and then parts of UK, lots of Western Europe. And having that time, that connection time together is absolutely brilliant as a parent. And sharing.
Okay, let's go there. What are the challenges of it? Because I can appreciate the positive sides of it, but what are the challenges? Because someone might be listening to this that has young kids and trying to figure out how do I go have these adventures with an 8-year-old or an 18-year-old? My son is 17. Love him to death. He spent one summer with me in Guatemala, Mexico, Belize. He spent the next summer in Southeast Asia, and he's spending this summer in Colombia with me. And the truth is, and I don't think he'd be embarrassed by me sharing this, he really doesn't like traveling. He's super excited beforehand. He's like, Dad, I can't wait to go to Colombia. I want to have Bandeja Paisa, da-da-da-da-da. And then, a week in, he's kind of like, man, I miss my bed. I miss my mom. I miss my this and that. So what can you share about that?
Possibly more challenging at that age, that late teens, like with your son. It's a tricky age where you're so connected with your group, your friends back home. I think I've caught Oliver at the right time where he's early enough to sort of introduce him to it, but he's not so used to having, he's not constantly with his group of friends because he doesn't have that level of independence, and he'll miss certain things. But actually, bringing him into it quite young and choosing the right destination is a big part, especially for families.
Yeah.
And I mentioned Costa Rica. For me, it's one of our biggest selling in terms of the number of travelers we send to Costa Rica. And yes, it's on people's radar. Many have been there, and it has its establishment circuit. But there's so much to that little country. And in terms of being safe for a parent, bringing young children around, decent healthcare, decent with our network contacts on the ground, welcoming guys, the Latino hospitality of just being very, very good with families and very natural around kids makes such a difference. And 2 years on, the number of times he'll say to me, Dad, when are we going back to Costa Rica? I absolutely love it. And then we took him to Panama. Panama is a similar, sort of extension to that. But the challenges are it was the road, the travel side on the road. Every child is going to say, when are we there? And how long is this? Oh, another few hours in the car. And quite honestly, you've got to do, in my eyes, what's going to be easiest for you for your own sanity. And the tablet comes in then. When I took him to Costa Rica, we had the tablet, and I suddenly thought, I need one of those things for the headrest where I can fix it into the car that we're going around in. I've never seen him so excited. It was like it was Christmas Day again when I walked out with this thing, clipped that into the headrest of the vehicle, and he was happy then for every single drive we did. So it made it sane for me. It made him. He was happy. He did not complain thereafter for any journey in the car. And we were driving at times for 3, 4, 5 hours. But then when you get somewhere, you're active and you're walking. And so I think it all balances out.
And I think when I heard you saying all that, the thought that popped in my head is it's really much more important to I'm going to say choose your battles because I'm not sure what other way to say it. But when you're traveling in a place that's not as consistent, not as routine, that whole need to choose your battles becomes a lot more important. So, for example, I grew up in Wyoming. I grew up in the mountains. There was always great tap water, right? The idea of buying a bottle of water for me is still kind of weird unless I feel like I need it, because it's all about me.
Yeah.
But my son won't drink tap water pretty much everywhere we go because he worries about stuff. And so, I'm buying bottles of water and it's like drives me nuts. I'm like, there's tap water right there and he won't drink it. And finally, when I realized, this will be a lot easier. And, a bottle of water in Colombia is, 75 cents. I mean, this is really about just me and my issues. Or you mentioned laundry earlier, I don't want to spend a lot of money for laundry. I'll walk 12 blocks to find a laundromat. And, my son doesn't want to do that.
Yeah.
So it's.
Well, I think again that goes back to we've introduced the kids from a young age, and that's quite common with a lot of the families. I'd say sort of 6 upwards. That's why I kind of chose that age, and every child's different. You'll get the ultra confident 3-year-old at times, but they're going to be rare. But I think the younger you can, within reason and within what's practical and sensible, again with the destination, introduce them to it as a family. You shouldn't feel put off. You don't need to wait till they're 20 because you might have missed the boat.
Yeah, that's the other thing I would say is definitely
you can't force the travel, as you said. We talked about earlier with my network of friends. It wasn't influenced by any of them that I fell into this industry or had the travel. But if you can influence it in some way and they get it when they're younger, that certainly
it can become kind of part of their life. I mean, it's normal for them.
Educational. I mean, what you learn, especially with these big long trips, what I've seen with families in particular, again, when the kids return, the maturity levels they've reached and what they've seen and done, and almost the levels of complacency for another elephant or another whatever is, but they've grown as individuals, and that's really always quite special to see. We have a thing where you have to write your diary each morning, and then you can have that over breakfast. But that's the morning task. Leaving that to the end of the day, it won't happen probably. So it's a little thing, to bring that educational component and to help them as well.
Yeah. No, that's very cool.
Some of our longer trips, we have families who, I've worked with families where they've had a nanny that travels with them for an extended period of time. Others are educating. The online options for learning digitally these days are vast. So again, technology has helped with that sort of thing, where that's going to be a natural worry for a parent if they're missing out on their standard education, and it will always be a big challenge as part of it. But there are ways to make that work.
It's very cool. I remember when I was actually the elephant sanctuary I went to in northern Thailand. There was a family from, I think they were from Switzerland, and father, mother, 2 teenage daughters, and they were doing, I think they'd signed up for 6 months. They were traveling Southeast Asia for 6 months, and the girls were kind of doing the remote learning, and yeah, it was cool. And they'd already been traveling for a month or two, and I remember thinking, man, that's really, really cool. I get Jackson for summer break, but I think something longer could be pretty cool. But then also sometimes I encourage people to consider the shorter trips if they're really because I keep doing that with my son. I get him for 2 months and I'm like, okay, we're going for 2 months. We're going hard. We're going to be at a different place every 3 or 4 days. Yeah. And now I'm at 2 or 3 weeks, a 2 or 3 week trip for him would be pretty cool. That's it's a manageable length of time to maintain that energy and the enthusiasm. But I think when you run into the months, anything sort of 3 months plus, I will always encourage a good strategic points where you're taking a pause somewhere and you're staying for longer in the same place, and there's not the packing unpacking, but equally just giving them the opportunity to get involved in something. And this stems from my background as well. When I went off for that year and a half, I was exhausted at times, and you need to just stop somewhere. You find somewhere where you can live, so to speak, for a number of weeks or a month or so. And there's so many projects, especially in chunks of the world, like parts of Latin America, Asia, Africa, wherever, to get involved. And that, A, you're doing something meaningful. B, you're learning and sharing skills that you may have to be able to help out. C, you're connecting with other people, so you're having that company and working on projects, whatever it may be. I did this in Nicaragua, I did this in Bolivia, and in Belize, and it really worked to give you somewhere to call home for a period of time. It gave you a purpose. It gave you that network of people around you relate to and have a bit of fun with. And you're helping. Be it people related, teaching English to kids, to conservation efforts, to wildlife. There's so much out there now. And Steve, I suspect that since you're working with your clients the way you do, longer stays, it sounds like those are things you guys can actually help with as well, to kind of help them get grounded like that. Whereas a traditional tour operator, I mean, it may have, you're going to go out for a day and visit a village and help plant a tree or something. But with a long-term stay, I think that is important to really. There is,
and there's a lot of projects out there, in different NGOs which aren't run in the way certainly their website would depict. But through our network and through our experiences, we've we found some very good places, which, everything is going to that cause. This isn't part of trying to make money out of it. It needs help. So we've done our homework on that.
Do you feel like sometimes with your clients you need to like slow them down, put the brakes on, and help them realize? Because I can imagine someone coming to you, I want to be in a different country every week, and if they've never traveled long term like that, I could see why they would do that, right? Okay,
the bucket list. This is the wish list, and have you got 10 years? It's this is. And it's not understand, especially coming from the UK. We're geographically, it's a very small country, and even here, you may not have travelled it that much, and it's going to take a number of hours to get somewhere. But the logistics, and that's a big part of what we're doing from our experiences on the road, making those point-to-point journeys seamless, and be it by road, flying at times, but you don't want to be in and out of an airport every 2 days. That makes you travel weary. So yes, it's always reading people back in on that wish list, and you don't need to go to every single national park in whatever country it might be. You don't need to see every glacier, because they'll all blur eventually. It's the same with the safaris. 14 days of non-stop safari is too much for most people.
How many wildebeest can you see? Or elephants, or
exactly. And so slowing the pace down is a massive part of what we do. Equally, trying to sort of keep people happy. They'll have their wish list for a reason. They want to see certain things, but the planning, a big part of it is this ongoing discussion. You have an initial pitch, and we're very big on, always been, in terms of giving the warnings. That here's the great things about what you've come up with. What will happen here, but here's a lot of here's the negatives. Here's the things to be aware of. And we should talk through these to make sure this is the right plan. And I think you've got to be a bit forceful and pushy to help them make those decisions at times, because what's going to, what the fatigue, grumpiness kicks in. If you're traveling as a family, you will fall out at times. You'll have battling with kids or other halves, whatever. There's, it's just real life. And to my point, that you don't go away and any other problems in your life just evaporate. Your child may still be a challenge. Speaking from my experience.
Yeah.
So it's all part of it. And if you're going too fast and trying to pack in too much, you're physically and mentally exhausted, and that will take away from the enjoyment. So you need these big wow moments within it, but you equally need slower pace, simpler stuff where you're just being. And doing nothing, I always say this, is doing nothing is doing something. And it's a big part of doing nothing is just being able to refresh, take a step back, think about what you've seen and done, and reflect and make sure it's going as you want.
Do you get either families, couples, singles? Will you get people that say, okay, I'm planning a year, but then they go home a few times during that year, so they break it up a bit, which is probably a good idea for a lot of people.
Some do. Yeah, we've worked with people who they have a mission perhaps of seeing every country in the world. It may well be very briefly at times, but that will be a long-term project over a number of years, and with no fixed end to it, but they'll certainly be back at home and then back out on the road again, depending on the line of work, depending on the circumstances, the situation. So
I know each person is kind of their own person, and when you get somebody come to you, I want to visit every country in the world, like just between you and I, nobody's listening to this, I'm sure. And what do you think? I mean, is that like, what do you think of that ambition, either for yourself personally, or when you hear that, what are the first things that come up for you?
For me, it's a lot. I don't have an issue with it, just so long as it's not just a ticking box exercise. What I don't like is rushing unnecessarily, and some places naturally you're going to spend a short amount of time, and it is just across the border. It could well be. But if that was the method of traveling for the whole goal of something extreme like that, and it really is, then I wouldn't encourage it.
It's almost not really about traveling. Well, it's traveling, but it's not about experiencing, right?
You'd spend more time just flying than anything else, than being on the road. You get tired of border crossings as well when you're on the road. And visas, the complexity of that to try and do something big is a big consideration. And certain things you'll have to go back home to sort out the next visa for. That's a consideration. And of course, budget is a huge factor if you're taking on something epic like. I like to go along the practical approach of more along the lines of less is more. Go deeper within the country, and I don't like the talk of I've done this. I hate that term. And you haven't, typically, and there's so much more you could do. But I mean, feedback at times as well for those on these longer trips, they really get a buzz more of getting off that beaten path, and they feel more awkward almost, or put off by a country where they're right on that Gringo Trail, for example, the Machu Picchu Trail, and having that as part of it, because you have to see it. Again, I'm highlighting Peru, but you go off somewhere like Gocta Falls or up to the north, or venture off to the coast. Parts of Colombia are good examples. Cartagena will receive a huge footfall of visitors, and many of those may just be off a cruise ship for half a day. But you then venture off to these random little Andean villages or riverside places that conjure up the Gabriel Garcia Marquez books, and that's what you'll connect with more the longer you're on the road with, and you'll love that sense of feeling, wow, I'm on my own here. There's a little bit of sense of discovery. I mean, I felt like that, certainly. When I always had an issue years and years ago, and this is not the case now because I adore Costa Rica. I know it so much better, but when I first turned up there, I spent months and years in Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and it just felt so extremely different there. And then Costa Rica felt too almost civilized, which as a parent and going somewhere to Latin America for the first time is absolutely brilliant. But at the time, it wasn't extreme enough for what I wanted at that particular point. And then you hit Bolivia or Guyanas, and that's incredible for that.
I don't know if it's a conflict or, earlier we we're kind of speaking about being lonely, and sometimes it's great to go out and kind of be around your tribe, the other people that are kind of doing the same thing you're doing. And at the same time, what you were just saying resonates with me, because when I show up somewhere, it's weird, but I kind of almost judge it like, is this a good place based on the absence of other travelers? It's like, I feel some sense of like, this place must be really cool for me to be, because I don't see any other, I'm going to use the term gringos. I don't see any other gringos around here. So therefore it must be a higher value experience, which there's some truth to that, but not necessarily. But I'm not sure where I'm going with this, other than just, I'm in Armenia, in Colombia now, which is not completely off the beaten path, but it's definitely different. I've spent most of my time in Medellin. So it's pretty much it's very, very different from that. And I love it. I'm like, oh, wow, I don't see any other foreigners, any other travelers here. This must be great. And of course, then my son is with me, who is already a little uncomfortable and misses home. And, so maybe Medellin is a better place. It's just a constant.
And that will be a sort of very personal thing. If you're coming from city life and that's your normal home life, wherever you're from and your work, you're going to miss probably that city. There's only so much countryside being completely silent on your own. It all sounds romantic, but I think that novelty can wear off actually quite quickly. You suddenly need life around you. And I think from our job, massive part of it is getting to know the travelers really, really well, and it's meeting them, it's doing the face-to-face, because you can't learn about someone just on the phone or on email. But I always look at, depending on where it is in the world, we'll know there's places you could go and be and live for a little bit. And living for a bit could be a week, but it'll give you that fix of something that you can relate to, and equally somewhere you comfortably and safely and happily wander around, because there's a bit of street life, or a good market, or cafe culture, just people watching. And it could well be a hub like a Cusco or Antigua, Guatemala, or I love Luang Prabang in Laos. I think that's got that sort of vibe where, yes, most tourists, if anyone goes to Laos, then they will be in Luang Prabang. It's equally somewhere you can just be and be independent as well with it, as opposed to be overly held. There's other things, if you want to go off and hike across Patagonia or what have you, you're better off having a guide and having some structure and an incredible route and going off piste. But I think there's certain places in the world which I find that really have their place to just enjoy that place and be a bit more independent and then move on again.
Right,
and that's part of slowing them.
Steve, I'm curious, because as I hear you discuss all this, I'm imagining, and you mentioned having kind of that initial probably not one conversation, obviously, but you're doing some sort of face-to-face with your client. And I'm almost envisioning like a psychological assessment, you know, for somebody, that somebody's going to be traveling for a year. They're coming to you and you want to understand them. You want to figure out, can you help them? Can you support them in achieving their goals? Are their goals realistic? Or are you going to spend the next 1 year planning, and another year following them through the course only to, you know, feel like you let them down because their expectations were completely. So I guess 2-part question, other than just a conversation, would you administer like a questionnaire, a personality, like a Myers-Briggs or something like that? Do you use any tools like that? Would you see value in it? Yeah. And number two, the second part is, I'm sure you've had some people that you're like, we're just not the right fit. Yeah, and I'd love to hear a little bit about that. Yeah,
I mean, we have a checklist of questions that we'll go through, and a big part of it, as I say, it's such an essential part of it. And early on is finding out about them, where they've been, what they've done, why they liked it. I like to focus on things that have gone wrong and why they've gone wrong and what they hated about it, what annoys you, what irritates you about traveling, or whatever. You know, finding out the interests. Why do you like that? Do you like this? No. Why don't you like? And you know, for example, horse riding. Why don't you like horse riding? Oh, because I'm scared of animals, or what have you. You know, there's different things.
It's a lot more revealing, isn't it?
It's revealing. Yeah,
dig into what they didn't like or problems they had.
Yeah, all of that information that you gather, you can help. It'll help you understand their tipping point, their comfort zone. Because most people, when they go away, they want to be challenged a bit. They want something different. You know, it's clearly been a dream. It's there somewhere. They've finally got the time. They've got the budget, and it's, you know, the moment in life to plan it. But so we do analyze them a lot.
Well, and you said most of the people are, you know, they want to push themselves. This is something they've been dreaming about, thinking about. And then I also realized that when the family unit gets involved,
compromises.
Because possibly one person in the family has always wanted to do this, really enjoys pushing themselves.
Yeah.
And maybe other people in the family are just very agreeable and want them to be happy. And it's almost like, tell me, what did your spouse not like about Cambodia, you know, when you went there, right?
It's not just yeah, and the kids as well. What have you done? A lot of the people we do work with are families. You know, the age profile is probably from late 30s to late 50s as a general rule.
Oh, okay.
Couples who are, you know, may go for a time away, but it may not be a year, but who are, you know, saved it up for retirement, but they've got that adventurous spirit. So a whole different criteria depending on the profile of who we're working with. But the families, you really want to speak to every single member of that family, and I encourage that. And typically we do. Even the kids, you know, even bringing them on to this, and they're all together. If some of them will be confident, and you can judge who's going to be happy on the road, what sort of things are going to come up. So there's a lot more to it than just those logistics. And it helps being a parent, again, doing this yourselves. With being able to give some practical advice on that.
I remember my wife and I at the time were managing a small fly fishing, scuba diving, eco resort. It was small. It was probably too small to be a resort, but it was about 30 miles offshore in Belize. And we'd get a new group of guests every week. And I remember this one lady was with her family, and she got off the boat on the dock, and I stuck my hand out to introduce myself. And she's like, I don't remember the name. I don't need to mention the name, but she's like, I'm here. I don't want to be here. This was my husband's idea, and I am going to be miserable for this whole week. I was like, okay, great. This is going to be fun. And I'll tell you what, by the end of the week, there were the hugs going on at the dock, and it was great that she acknowledged that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it gave me something, you know, it gave me something to work with. Okay, I'm not going to spend the whole week trying to guess whether or not she wants to be here.
Yeah.
She doesn't want to be here. So what can I do to make it fun for her? This is my challenge now. I know what the challenge is. She's the one. We've got 20 guests just got off the boat, and she's the one that is my goal is to create something for her that she can enjoy it. And it was actually kind of fun. So I was happy she did that.
No, I find, again, with getting to know every member of that family, you're bringing in components that's going to keep each, be it the youngest or the oldest, happy at times. You're typically, if you can keep the youngest happy, the oldest, the parents are going to be happy. So there's a little bit of that to it. But to your point just then, we've a number of times, this has been not uncommon. It's happened enough over the years where there's that turning up at a hotel in a place, possibly it's got dark already. That's one thing in the planning you always try and avoid is arriving somewhere in darkness that's new, especially if it's somewhere quite random. And if you've been on the road for a while, you've had a cranky journey, there might have been a delay on the flight, you've turned up in a bad state of mind. And no matter what it is, you're going to hate it. And we've had the messages through, I hate it, I can't spend 3-4 nights here, this is awful. And there's no real reason to it. It's just that probably the person's not happy at that very moment. I say, okay, but we've got to give it a night. You've got to stay there tonight. There's nowhere else to go. This is it. Just
or a cranky kid, exactly. Hungry kid that's completely. Like, I don't like it here. I want to go back to wherever we were just at, where there was on the beach, and I don't like it here, da-da-da-da-da, and then that can make the whole family miserable. Oh,
absolutely. But every single time that's happened, the next morning, it's like a click. And a few hours have passed, a leisurely breakfast. They've woken up to see where they are. The staff have been wonderful because we've been in touch with them, and there's, you've got to put it out. And just, this is what we need to do. And the glowing reports for that, and an apology 9 times out of 10, but I'm sorry I get it because I've been there. I've spent too long in certain countries where I've got cranky and I've got fed up, and I thought, oh, it's a fool. But it's just it's that travel fatigue that hits everyone.
And it's interesting because even you and I won't speak for you, but I know for me, there have been many times I've shown up somewhere. I'm like, yeah, I don't like it here so much, but I kind of know that, like, I'm hungry, I'm irritable. The host didn't give me good directions on how to get to whatever it is. And usually in a day or two, I'm like, oh, I kind of like this place. And I remember there was one spot I stayed in Mexico City, and it really was bad, but I was so convinced that I was just being too soft. And I was like, okay, this place is bad, but I'm sure that I can do this. I was in the infantry. I used to sleep in the mud and dirt holes. And I'm like, how can I not manage this little apartment I was sharing the apartment with a lady that owned the place, and she'd sit in the living room and just chain smoke the whole it was horrible. It really was a bad place. But I was like, I'm tougher and I already paid for a month. I was in this. I was like, I can do this. I can do anything. And then finally, after 3 days, I broke down crying. And I was like, why am I trying to torture myself and punish myself and convince myself that, I don't deserve a better. It was a whole emotional breakdown. Yeah. And that's the only time that there was actually a place that really was horrible that, and I just didn't want to admit it. So, and then eventually I left, got my money back from Airbnb, no big deal, but it was an interesting, things come up when you're traveling that it's like, ooh, where did that come from? What is that telling me about myself and my own insecurities or my own whatever? And it was kind of,
you learn so much about yourself as an individual, plus your family, whoever you're traveling with, and on top of everything, it's huge. And I think you've got to listen to yourself when you're especially on these long trips. And again, long can mean different things for different people. But the last epic long trip I did, which was another year out, I was going through Asia. And the last 3 months of it or so were in India. And I adore it. It's somewhere that I need to go back and get a fix again with India every few years or however long, because it just gets you. But at that particular point, I'd been on the road for a long period of time. And I was travel weary again. And but the whole point in my mind, I didn't want to give in because I wanted to go back overland through Mongolia with the Trans-Siberian and the Trans-Mongolian railways. And again, I'm a big advocate for travel overland because you see so much, and I love just staring out and observing, a bit on a train or road or whatever it might be. But actually, I listened to, and I thought, if I go there, Mongolia had been on the wish list for so long, and having seen so many countries that had been on that wish list, I didn't want to go there with tired, frustrated, angry eyes, and thought, no, just fly home. Go save Mongolia for another time, and that was a good decision to know when to, in that particular case, to cut that trip and head home because I was not in the right state of mind.
That makes a lot of sense.
Mongolia and disliked it, and it would have been a waste.
Two things came out of that. One is just India in general. I I do not know India. I have not had the opportunity to visit India. I don't know what it's like for you in the UK, but I know a lot of Americans that I've spoken with that have gone to India that probably just did it wrong or didn't. Their expectations were completely wrong, and they're like, "Oh, I would never go back." The truth is, I hear a lot of negativity around it. But I've also worked in the travel business. I've talked to people that loved it as well. But so, what do you think it is about it, India, that people just really get it wrong and they don't seem to appreciate it the way you do?
The biggest flag with India is trying to do, for one, it's enormous. With, I think now the world's biggest population, 1.3 billion, most of us, depending on which country we're from, cannot relate to that sheer intensity of everything that goes with it. And it can be extreme weathers. It's just extreme. But so the planning there with a country like India, for me, is even more aware of the sort of psychology with it, because too much of the big cities, which are on that classic trail that will feature on 99 times out of 100 itineraries, it's too much of the same thing. It'd be too many temples or too many big cities, and especially the places where you are so obviously a tourist and they care and they'll be coming up. You need to balance that out with countryside or mountains or the coast or something that's different to make it work. And so it's a challenge because someone's got 2 weeks, say, or less even at times. What can you fit in a country of that size? But you go out there and you go into Delhi, you'll probably see the Taj Mahal. You might tap into Jodhpur, Jaipur, or Udaipur. They're all big cities. They're big and overwhelming and exhausting cities. And they're wonderful when you can slow it down a bit and put in some little heritage stays with a local family in the middle of nowhere and enjoy that, and just a different interaction with the people as opposed to feeling on guard. People will go there and they feel threatened or fearful. It's different. And that's always a shame, but it's all to do with the planning. And someone who's been there and spent long enough time there will get that, what I'm saying. And the longer you have, the easier it becomes to, of course, slow it down. But right. I think a big part of it as well is, and this applies to many countries, don't look at it as a one-time visit. If you want to see the south of India, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and wherever, Karnataka, you want to see the wildlife parks in the middle. It doesn't have to just be what you Google, which will come up on number one. And that's where specialist operators will know where to take someone and quiz them. Again, it's understanding the client, what's right for them. Where have you been in the past? Is India right for you? There's often talk of Sri Lanka being a stepping stone, get a taste of that. And there's some truths to that, in terms of culture and feel and what have you. But, start in the south of India. Don't just do the classics. It's so easy to be influenced by what you may read online. But talking to people who've been there, try and test it, had their own challenges and struggles with it, certainly. But, a country like India should be a wow. It ended up being my honeymoon destination. And we went around the world about 10 times trying to work out where to go. And I just thought, there's nowhere that can wow you, in my eyes, quite like it. And that's India. And it was epic.
That's interesting. Yeah. So now I'm envisioning those people I just kind of mentioned, they're looking at the big tour operator that offers the 7 nights, 8 days, classic India. Yeah. And it's somebody traveling from the States maybe, and they've got, 2 weeks vacation the whole year, and it takes 2 days to get there. And, so
it's tough.
So they're stressed and tired when they get there, and then they get off having never been there, I don't know what I'm talking about, but they get off in Delhi and they're like overwhelmed, and they're not huge curry fans anyway, like the Brits are. So maybe it's just like, whereas Europeans,
half of their couple, one half of the couple had it on the wish list, and the other half's given in and said yes, okay, we'll do
fine.
it. But the dynamics, even before getting there, are wrong for it.
And I think this is maybe just kind of a generalization, I know, but Europeans are a little closer. They have a little bit familiarity with the culture. They probably see more people from India in UK, more curries, foods. Yeah. The foods aren't quite as different. And also just the way my perspective or my view of, Europeans is they tend to like to travel. They're much more comfortable traveling outside of the country in general. Have a little bit more vacation time maybe in general. And so it's like, okay, I'd like to go to India, and I don't know,
it's one
feels
of those
different.
destinations that I would always advise go to someone who knows it, to help with the planning there and properly specialise it. It's not just someone who's been to that little tiny core circuit of Rajasthan, but has been way beyond it, because that little core circuit of Rajasthan could be the worst decision. Don't start there. Ease up to the forts, or it could be no interest ever to it. You can get templed out in many parts of the world, many countries.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And a part of what we do is being aware of that and bringing in wildlife components, bringing in coastal activities, be it diving, surfing. There's incredible places, Lakshadweep Islands, the Andaman Islands, hiking in the Himalaya, the different north, the North Territories up there. It's just epic. So it's all to do with the planning. But I think also an acknowledgement that's just not for no country's for everybody. Just like no matter the quality of the hotel is not going to be for everyone. Despite no matter what it costs, we're all individuals. So, which is
why it's so important to have that initial conversation that you were discussing. And I did ask, but I don't think we got there. I want to hear about people that not names specifically, but those folks that you've had conversation with, and you're like, yes, we're clearly not the right fit. Does that happen? What's that like? And any other tour operators that might be listening to this, or people that are thinking about going, I mean, what should people know?
It does. Yeah, I think absolutely. And acknowledging that as a business, especially as a small niche business, I'm very aware of not everyone will be the right fit for us as a company. We're cautious with the planning, but we do like to encourage taking you just a little bit out of your comfort zone, and especially the destinations we're talking about. It is going to be pretty different typically to home life, and that's what most of the people we work with want when they've got that luxury of time with the sabbatical. But I think we'll know, and because there's the human aspect. They're not dealing with a bot or it's just all by email. There's a lot of human interaction. If you're not connecting with that individual, I think you have to just hold your hands up and just say, we're not right. Has it happened? Not in recent times. Most of the time you find a common ground and you're constantly digging deeper. And sometimes it's easier to find that connection. Other times it's more challenging. But and if you don't achieve it, and there's other factors as well. The sheer cost of going on the road for a year is expensive. We all have seen the things like flights going up in price, but that's typical throughout the entire world. And hotels and services, privately guided. A lot of the stuff we're doing is bespoke with, just for those individuals. So there's a big factor is what the cost of this sort of epic trip.
Okay. And then you've got some folks there on your team that you work with. Do you find yourselves kind of like, I think this person would be a great fit for Bob or Mary or whatever, absolutely, and helping assign them with the right personality type that's going to be able to stick with them for a year and a half, 2 years?
Definitely.
Yeah.
You just know, you get a good feeling that this is right for them. And same for which country or which routing and the pace. Sure. Equally, I think if someone's so well traveled as well, and they're so used to being completely independent, then I think we have to hold our hands up and say that we're probably going to be an irritation almost to it. You've traveled too much. You're almost like one of us. So being honest and saying, I think you should here's a little bit of guidance. Here's a rough outline of what you can do, but I think you're going to get the right thing. Actually, what you really want is to be doing this yourself. You're a planner. You've got that in you. So there'll be those.
It's actually kind of hard to be a planner. It can be difficult to be a planner for a planner type, right? Yeah, if they've traveled out on their own, all of a sudden they're like, who are you to tell me? That can actually create more conflict than when you have somebody like, look,
absolutely,
I trust you, help me.
Completely. My wife, her biggest fear is planning a trip, even a weekend away from me. She finds it terrifying to plan a surprise trip, knowing that's the way my brain works.
Yeah, yep. Steve, I could chat with you for hours. Just fascinating conversation, and I really have enjoyed this conversation. And before we wrap it up, though, I want to just ask you, what did I forget to ask? What should I have asked? Or what do you think our listeners should know about either you or LiNGER Travel before we say goodbye?
I think a lot in those pandemic years, it gave a lot of time for people to think, what do I want to do? Where's the career going? You hit a certain point. if you've got that in your mind and you want to take this sort of extended trip, no matter how you do it, fully independent, upscale luxury, basic on a budget, my advice is don't regret not doing that, because there's one thing that you can't buy that time back. Do it at a time when you can, physically, financially, whatever. Don't regret not having a trip, because those memories are forever. And it's all possible. It's just, it takes that big jump to actually make it happen. But if it's something you want to do, you should do it.
Just do it. Very good words. Wise words, Steve. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to share with us. And
thank you, Jason.
We'll have a link to your website down in the show notes. So anybody that wants to take a look at that and reach out and have a conversation with you, it sounds like that conversation is really a good starting point. And whether it's a good fit or not, at least they can hopefully cause them to take some sort of action, get up off the couch and go do something. Not that anybody listening to this podcast is sitting on the couch, but it could be. Steve, thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you, Jason.
I trust you enjoyed listening to the conversation as much as I enjoyed recording it. If you're enjoying the Big World Made Small podcast, please take a moment to tell the algorithm by subscribing and posting a review so that others can benefit as well. I also invite you to take a quick trip over to bigworldmadesmall.com and join our private adventure travel community to receive new episode notifications, special access to our guest experts, and perhaps even some exclusive partner offers that we haven't discussed on the podcast. I'll publish another episode soon. Until then, keep exploring. It's the best way to make a big world feel just a bit smaller.